Hello, students. I am Sam Sir of BBIS, and we are in chapter 7, the second part. This chapter is known as tertiary and quaternary activities, and this is from your book on geography, known as Fundamentals of Human Geography. So, when we say communication, we mean it's a transmission of uh, facts and ideas and messages, and it's transmission and interpretation, that is, coding, transmittance, and decoding. So to achieve this, whenever we use telephone or the mobile phone or emails, we call that as telecommunication. Often, if pictures are also going by these methods, mostly by internet, that is also telecommunication. But otherwise, we have the printed and the written matter such as letters and cards, books, and the magazines and the newspapers. Those are known as the ordinary mail. Now these, and you should understand one thing, that before the technology became so advanced that we have the modern means of telecommunication. Just a few decades ago, we were using the old type of communication. We were using the letters and cards. Nowadays, you greet each other on birthday by on the phone by so many apps you have on your phone. And today's mails are so quick, they are instantaneous. You just send a mail, and the other person, even if he's sitting on some other uh, place of the world, receives the mail immediately. So we call that as email, but the earlier days we used to call them as snail mails. Now, for mass communication, when we say mass communication, it means the methods we use to communicate to a very large group of people. We use radio, television, we use a news relay, internet, magazines, and newspaper. Now, satellite and internet have made communication instantaneous, and it's very direct also. And from anywhere, at any time, anybody can communicate with anybody else. So, this topic becomes an important topic for your examination. You should know what is communication, and you should know the methods of communication, and you should also know about how it was in the past days and how it is in the present days, and the difference between them. You should be able to elaborate on this. So, invention of writing preserved our messages and helped to make communication depend on means of transport. Now, speaking is also communication. And nowadays, you know that if some people, they do not trust you really well, so if you call them on the phone, they record your voice. All right. So that is one way of communication and guaranteeing or preserving the message. But the best form is to preserve the message is to write it down, or to print it down. So these kind of physically created messages, like on the paper, for example, they require physical means of transport. They require actual the vehicles. So for that, we have the postal department. We also have the courier service, or so they are the ones which are physically lifting up the mail from one place and carrying it to some other location. Now, in this respect, so the means of the various means of transport become as important as the communication itself. So, if you are waiting for your newspaper in the morning, 7 a.m. with the tea, you want your newspaper. If the transport system is not efficient enough, then you will have your tea but not your newspaper. Or if the newspaper arrives 2 days late, it's of no use at all, because you have other ways of keeping in touch with the uh, current affairs. You have the television, and then when you have the newspaper in your hand 2 days afterwards, then you say, oh, this is old news. Now that is why all the forms of transport are referred to as lines of communication. And in this case, efficiency of communication depends on the efficiency of transport. You have to send something something urgently to some place. And so what you do is you first see which is the best way. Is it the speed post, or is it the registered post, or is it the courier? If it is courier, is it this X company or Y company or Z company, which is more reliable or more quicker? And then the cost. So when everything is suitable, then you use that mode of transport or mode of communication. Electronic medium of communication also does not depend on the transport system. Electronic medium depends on the signals, the digital signals, and they can be transmitted on optical fiber, or else they can also be transmitted on the internet. Now, optical fiber, they have replaced the copper cables, which were once upon a time used. Copper was expensive, and people had the habit of stealing copper cables because copper is expensive. Uh, Optical fibers are some different technology. The signals are coded into pulses of light and transmitted through the optical fibers. Now, if a person digs up optical fibers in the uh, in the thought that he will get some copper metal for sale, he'll be disappointed. And because these are using light for transmittance, they are as quick as light, almost as quick as light. After coding, transmission, and then decoding takes place. That is also an electronic medium of communication, because lot of electronics is involved in coding, transmission, and decoding of messages. Now we look at certain aspects about services. Some services are geared to industry, and some are geared to the people, and some are geared to both industry as well as the people. For example, if there's a communication uh, you are to get from the bank, or if you buy shares and you need to have some kind of share certificates. So it's a conjunction between industry and people, the industry and you. And services are provided to people who can pay for them. All right, we always pay for our services. There are two types of services. We have the low order services, sorry, which are more common and widespread, such as grocery shops, the laundries, the cobbler, the electrician, the plumber, etc. Then you have high order services as well. These services are more specialized, and they are not always needed by everybody. For example, accountants and consultants and physicians, all of us do not need them. Then you have again two different types of labor, which is physical labor and mental labor. So, physical labor is one in which the body is involved, the strength of the body is required, and at the end of the day, you feel physically tired. Examples are jobs of the gardeners and launderers and barbers and carpenters and the drivers, and such are physical labor. You also have mental labor, in which um, more of the work is of the brain. So teachers and lawyers, physicians, musicians, they are all mental labors. Then there are certain services which are regulated or controlled or supervised by governments or by companies. And these services are all important services, such as transport, we have telecommunication, energy, and water supply. The union government or the state government, they have established corporations to supervise and control these services. And often the services are also located uh, according to the service themselves. For example, if the educational institutes are being talked about, so these educational institutes have to be near the human settlements. Let's talk about personal services. This is made available to people to facilitate their work in daily life. If you're working hard and if you're working for long hours, then naturally lot of things which are important for your own life and family tend to get neglected. But there are people around you who know this and understand this, and for some monetary consideration, they are willing to do your work. For example, travel agents are willing to book your tickets. If you're not able to do it yourself, they said, all right, give me some extra money, I'll book it for you. Then, if your electricity and water bill needs to be paid, there are people who say, all right, give us 10 rupees extra and we'll do it for you. You rush to the railway station to catch a train and you need to park your scooter somewhere. And then you go to the two-wheeler parking lot or a four-wheeler parking lot, and there you pay by the hour or by the day, and they look after your vehicles. So there are people who are unskilled usually, and they have migrated to cities or to the urban areas in search of employment, and they were not so lucky in finding such employment. So such people, they generally start such services, and such people are usually unorganized. The sector is still unorganized. But one good organized sector, but seen only in one city in India, that is in Mumbai, or rather, we can safely say it is the only city in the world, and that is in Mumbai. You have a service known as Dabbawalas. These are people who are the Dabbawalas. And can you see the number of dabbas they're carrying, the tiffins they're carrying? And also, these tiffins are not the ones which started from their house. This outer cover is just a container, and it has got some marking in paint, red paint or blue paint or yellow paint or green paint. And often these markings have rubbed off because these dabbas are used every day. Still, these people ensure that the tiffin which was sent from your house reaches you in your office in Mumbai, anywhere in Mumbai, and after you finish your food, your empty tiffin, which is there packed inside this dabba, also reaches your house. And on top of that, there is no mistake. Even one tiffin in 1 million tiffin does not go to the wrong person. So that is known as Six Sigma rating. So this is the only service of this kind in the world. And these people are not educated. They don't have employment and they have to look after their families and they don't have any other means of doing that. So they are into this service. It's marvelous. Now we look at some more people in different countries, in different economies. How is it? Most of the people today are service sector workers. Services are provided in all societies. Now, if you look at your own family, perhaps, or the people around you, you'll find more people in the services. There'll be lesser people in manufacturing. Manufacturing means a secondary activity. There will be even lesser people in the primary sector, that is agriculture or life animal and livestock sorry, husbandry or mining. There'll be very less people there, but there'll be more people in the tertiary activities and little less than that in the quaternary activities. No matter what kind of level of development we have, even in an underdeveloped country, there'll be more people who are in this sector. So, in developed country, a higher percentage of workers is employed in providing services compared to less developed countries. In less developed countries, you have more people in the primary sector, that is the agriculture and animal husbandry and mining, fisheries. In developed countries, again, the trend is increasing towards the tertiary activities, and it remains unchanged or decreasing in primary and secondary sectors. The primary sector or secondary sector in developed countries is reducing. The number of people, the proportion, the percentage of people there is reducing, and the percentage of people providing tertiary and quaternary activities are increasing. And because of that, even the secondary activities, either it's stable, that is stagnant, or reducing. Now, here's a good comparison which I want all you to understand and know. This is a comparison of these sectors in developed as well as developing countries. Now, the indicators are labor force characteristics. And in developed countries, the primary sector, it forms a small part of economy. But in developing countries, the primary sector is a significant part of the economy. In developed countries, the secondary sector uh, uh, contributes to more of the economy. In developing countries, the secondary sector is contributing lesser percentage to the economy. In developed countries, the tertiary sector makes up the largest part of economy. This is important. And in developing countries, there are few tertiary activities. It is not that developing countries have no tertiary activities. It's not true. They have it, but in a lesser proportion. Now let's look at the income groups for and compare that with primary, secondary, and tertiary economic sectors. Here it's very clear that in primary sector, as the income group increases, like from low income group to high income group, the contribution of agriculture, that is the primary activities, is steadily reducing. The yellow bars. The first bar is tall, the second uh, yellow bar is shorter, and the third yellow bar is the shortest. When we look at the secondary sector, that is the manufacturing sector, the green bars, in low income group, you have a longer bar than the middle income group, which is still longer than the high income group. So here again, we can see that there is a decrease in the secondary activities, that is manufacturing. So if you're talking about high income, people would definitely go for the tertiary activity, because if you see the brown bar in low income, it is just slightly lesser than the secondary, the greener bar, the green bar. But in the middle income level and the high income level, the brown bar is significantly taller. So this tertiary activities can significantly enhance the income of a family or of a person. Now here we look at three countries. One, we have the United States of America, which is a developed economy, and then we have Brazil, which is again developed economy, but still people are some significant proportion of the person are into primary activities. And then we have Nepal, which is not a developed economy. Now look at the size of the green portion of the pie. In Nepal, the green portion, that is the primary activities, take up 81%. That means majority of the population is into primary activities. That reduces to 23% in Brazil, and in the United States of America, it's only 2%. Now look at the secondary sector. In Nepal, only 3% of the people of the population is into manufacturing or production. In Brazil, it's 24%, and in the United States, the percentage is almost the same at 23%. But when you look at the tertiary sector, Nepal does have a tertiary sector um, population which is working in that sector, 16%. But look at Brazil, it's 53%. It's a big, more than three times that of Nepal. And in the United States of America, it's uh, some five times more than Nepal, 75%. So you can say that if it's a developing economy, as in Brazil, there will be more percentage of people of the percentage of the population that will be in the tertiary sector. The United States, another good example. You have the largest proportion of the population in the service sector or the tertiary sector. Similarly, is the distribution of income, the GDP, the national income. The blue bottom, that is in agriculture, remains around 16 to 17%. From 2009, it has reduced to in 2019, it is reduced by some 2%. And the industry has also reduced the black portion of this figure. From 31%, it has reduced to 24.88%. But if you look at the gray bar, gray portion of the bar, in 2009 it was 45.98, that is around 46%, and it has risen to 49.88%, that is almost 50%. This is the contribution of these services to GDP in 10 years. Now, in our textbook, we have an example of tourism. So, first of all, tourism is any activity taken for the purpose of recreation rather than for business. Nowadays, we also call that as we also have something known as business tours. People who are into jobs which require them to go on tour again and again. This they call that as business tour, but that is not the tourism we are talking about. That is for their convenience and for their tours. They say business tour, but tourism means it is for recreation. It's for relaxing. Now, this is a tertiary activity and provides some 250 million jobs and contributes to some 40% of the GDP of the country. Tourism enables several related industries to flourish. You have people into accommodation or hospitality industry like hotels. You have people who are into restaurants, provide the meals. You have the travel agencies providing transport. You have people and providing entertainment. You have the souvenir shops. You have the guides and so on. And tourism may be seasonal or it may be perennial, and that depends on the geographical factors and climatic factors. For example, hardly anybody will come to Rajasthan in the summer months. And if you want to go skiing on ice and snow, it's better to do that in the winter months and in climate where you can find them. Now, people who live in the cold countries, way up in the north or way down in the south, they prefer warmer climate. They want to come to a climate where a lot of sunshine is there and warmth is there. It's good for their health also. And people who live in hot places or humid places or hot and dry places like in deserts, for a change, they will want to go to colder places. This is the human tendency. We always like the opposites. So, warmer places around the Mediterranean coast and the west coast of India, that is Maharashtra, Ratnagiri, Mahabaleshwar, Chiplun, Goa, uh, some parts of Karnataka, they become popular destinations of tourists in the world. And other places are places where one can pursue winter sports, and these are found mostly in the mountainous areas. Also, places with scenic landscape and national parks are popular, but these places tend to be scattered. They are not located in one location. And historic towns also attract tourists because of the monuments. People who want to know more about the past, and if a person is more oriented towards the heritage and culture, they will prefer to go to such places. Now, if you look at the tourism in Mediterranean countries, you get a very interesting. map or graph like this. The central region of the Mediterranean area, Tunisia, Malta, Albania, Italy, Greece, Montenegro, they get a lot of tourists. Spain also, Lebanon, and they contribute a lot of money to these countries. Tourists who come to these countries, they contribute a lot of money to these countries where they have visited. This is a picture of from the Mediterranean region. Now, when we look at the factors which are affecting tourism, we have demand and transport. When we say demand, it means the demand for holidays has increased rapidly in the recent years, and the reason is availability of disposable income. This is the income you can afford to spend over and above the after meeting your needs. An improvement in the tourism related services which are available, and availability of free leisure time. In India, we have less and less of free time available. In Europe, you have more and more of free time available. They, as such, work 5 days in a week. And in India, we are willing to work 7 days in a week. They work certain number of hours in a day. In India, we say, all right, I will not look at the number of hours. I want my income. Or if I don't work, my boss is always there to pull my leg, or my colleagues are there to do the same. So in India, we are losing that touch. People in the Western countries, they follow the Indian system of relaxation, and they do relax. They do work less number of hours, less number of days. And this extra work they have shifted to India, because we say make in India, do it in India, and all that. So that workload has shifted to India, because in India, for less money, we are willing to do their work. That leaves less and less of free leisure time with us, and less of disposable income also. But worldwide, it's not like this. In developed countries, it's just the opposite. They have time as well as they have the money, so they have the willingness to go on tours. That is the reason why tourism has developed. The second factor is transport. So naturally, if you want to go on holidays, you'll go to a place where first of all you can reach, isn't it? Now wherever there's an improvement in transport facilities, this opens up that area for the tourists. And better vehicles and better roads have helped tourism to grow. And often you have holiday packages, and they are much significantly reduced costs. Now, do you think that this could be one solution to the Naxalite infested areas, or the terrorist infested areas of India? For example, in Chhattisgarh and Odisha, some parts of Maharashtra, and in Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir has got a good scope for tourism because of the natural beauty. But the transportation is difficult because of the Himalayas, and then the demand is also there, but then there's the fear of encountering difficulties when the terrorists create problems. Now, let's look at the factors which attract tourism. First of all, is the climate. So, people from cold areas like to go to places with warm, sunny climate. And Mediterranean region and regions of southern Europe have good climate, and they are easily reachable also from other colder regions of Europe and Asia, and that makes it attractive for tourists which are looking for good climate holidays. And those who want to go skiing, they prefer to go higher up in the mountains. Second is the landscape. People prefer to spend their holidays in an attractive environment, and such places can be found and on mountains and beaches, near lakes and sea coasts, and in forests. areas, areas which are not completely altered by human activity. People want to go to such places. The third one is history and art. People are attracted by history and art of an area that has historical significance. People like to visit ancient and beautiful towns, archaeological sites. They spend time exploring castles and palaces and churches. A lot of Europe is like that. People want to see the culture also of a place, and also they want to benefit from the economy. So people who are interested in the ethnic and local customs, they go to such places. And some destinations also provide tourism at lower cost, and so they have become popular. uh, and some places you can also have homestay. You get a cottage like this, you pay on daily basis, and you get all the services there. The food is cooked for you, the house is cleaned for you, and the laundry is done for you. You just have to spend some time, few days, just relax there, and then go back to your place. So such uh, homestays we can find in Goa, in Madikeri, in Coorg, which is in Karnataka. These are some examples. Now, here's one type of tourism which has become important nowadays, especially in India. It's known as medical services. So, India has emerged as a destination for medical tourism. The reason is we have low cost of treatment, we have qualified doctors, experienced and skillful doctors are there are surgeons also. The medical services that can be outsourced, there are certain services which can be outsourced very easily. That is interpreting the MRI images. You can just email that image to a person who can interpret that for you. You pay some money and you get the results. Even ultrasound tests can be interpreted like that. The emphasis in any case is providing, improving the quality, and providing specialized care. And it's interesting to know that in the year 2020, in spite of the COVID 19 situations, medical tourism has earned for our country 9 billion US dollars. That's a lot of money. Now, when we say medical tourism, it is a combination of medical treatment with international tourism. So, if a person goes from Delhi to Chennai, that is not medical tourism. But if a person goes from Delhi to Singapore, that is medical tourism because you're changing a country. Or else, if somebody from the United Kingdom comes to Mumbai for medical treatment, that is also medical tourism. Something for you to enjoy. Now we look at the quaternary services. Now, all the people who work in the segment of service sector that is knowledge oriented, here the emphasis on knowledge come under quaternary service sector. Now, in tertiary sector, we were talking about skills. All right, here we are talking about knowledge. There you had skills, knowledge, yes, and experience also. Here we are talking about knowledge. They come under the quaternary sector. Yes, skill and experience are also important here. Their skill and experience are always valuable anywhere. I give the example to my students. Like suppose you want to fly from point A to point B, and you have choice of selecting the pilot. There is one pilot who is 27 years old and who has got 3 years of flying experience, but his academic qualification is marvelous. Is always 95% plus everywhere. Then you have an old man who is just having 1 year to retire, and this man has put 30 years in flying, but his paper qualifications do not look very good. Very good. So, with whom would you like to fly? So my students always tell me I want to fly with the one who's having more experience. That answers the question here. Now, the term quaternary sector is used to describe knowledge-based part of the economy. It is knowledge-based part of economy, and this includes knowledge-oriented economic sectors such as IT, that is information technology. When IT is connected with communication, we have ICT, that is information and communication technology. Then you have the media, whether it is television or the printed media. You have research and development, especially in scientific field. All right. Then you have the information based services such as information generation and information sharing, which again becomes the into the territory of ICT. And similarly for knowledge generation and sharing, so you have information generation and sharing and knowledge generation and sharing. Such activities fall under quaternary sector. So just be very sure, very clear about what it is. So when you're clear and sure about what it is, you can yourself talk about so many examples. Now, consultancy is also one example where consultants, they advise to businesses. They advise and help the business generate more profit. The quaternary sector is the largest employer, even larger than the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary sectors. Over half of all workers in developing economies are in the knowledge sector. There is a very high growth and demand for all knowledge based and information based services. Professionals such as mutual fund managers, tax consultants, software developers, statisticians, they all need information for their work, for their respective profession, and they're looking at somebody who can give them the information. And the people who are there to provide information are there in the quaternary sector. People who work in office buildings, elementary schools, colleges, classrooms, hospitals, doctors' offices, theaters, accounting firms, brokerage firms, they all belong to the quaternary service providers and users. Either they're providing or they're using. In people who are into, especially into tertiary activities, they generate a lot of information, and this information, if they are willing to share, it becomes a source for the people who want them uh, sitting anywhere in the world, and those are the users of this information. Now in your textbook you have one small box on page 63, and it says about the color of the collar, this is something, although this is in on that particular page where two topics, because of COVID-19 conditions in the country or in the world, have been removed out of the syllabus for the academic year 2020-21. If these are asked, this is important for you to know, and this is also interesting. So just pause on this page and read it. All right, this is the end of the chapter. In summary, from the lowermost box on the left hand side, primary sector are these are processes and extracts that produce and package raw materials and basic food from the earth. Secondary sector, they manufacture, process, and construct finished goods by transforming raw materials. Tertiary sector, they provide services for general population and businesses to acquire and use the finished goods. Quaternary sector, they are knowledge based and skill based for complex processing and handling of information and environmental technology. Kinesic sector is not there in your syllabus for the year 2020. This is high level economic and social decision making through responsible institutions. This is also the end of the chapter. So give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Bye till then.